Captain Marcus Washington stared at the airline owner's business card in his trembling hand. 20 years of spotless service destroyed by one white flight attendant's lies. His phone buzzed, the owner himself. In 5 minutes, either his career would end, or justice would finally prevail. Before we dive into this shocking story of racial discrimination at 30,000 feet, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories about people fighting back against injustice in the workplace. Now let's find out how Captain Washington found himself in this life-changing moment, and whether he'll clear his name or lose everything he's worked for. 8-year-old Marcus Washington pressed his nose against the glass at Harlem's local library, eyes fixed on a dusty aviation book. The librarian, an older white woman, watched him skeptically. "Those pilots don't look like you," she said, not unkindly. "Maybe pick something more realistic?" But young Marcus clutched the book tighter. "One day planes will have captains who look like me," he whispered, too quietly for her to hear. 30 years later, Captain Marcus Washington adjusted, his crisp uniform in the crew locker room mirror of Elite Airways. The gold stripes on his sleeves and the wings on his chest represented every obstacle he'd overcome. Every doubter, every closed door, every "we don't usually hire your kind" rejection. Elite Airways was the 5th airline he'd applied to after graduating top of his class. The first 4 had found creative reasons why he wasn't quite the right fit, despite his impeccable credentials and military aviation experience. When Elite finally took a chance, Marcus vowed to be nothing less than exceptional. For 20 years, he had been. "Looking sharp as always, Captain Washington," said First Officer Ramirez, entering the locker room. "Ready for number 10,000? Marcus nodded, allowing himself a small smile. Today marked his 10,000th commercial flight, a milestone few pilots ever reached. He'd calculated it last night, sitting at his kitchen table while his wife Aisha prepared a special breakfast for this morning. "Can't believe they didn't make an announcement about it," Ramirez continued. "When Captain Hendricks hit 5,000, they had champagne waiting at the gate." Marcus shrugged. "Different standards, different pilots," he said simply. Throughout his career, Marcus had learned which battles were worth fighting. When he was bumped from promotion lists despite perfect evaluations. When passengers occasionally requested another pilot upon seeing him. When colleagues made jokes about affirmative action. He'd swallowed his pride, maintained his professionalism, and let his performance speak for itself. Captain Reynolds had taught him that strategy, the first black pilot at Elite, now retired. "Be twice as good, work twice as hard, complain half as much," Reynolds had advised. "It's not fair, but it's how we make it." Marcus checked his watch. Still 90 minutes before flight. He pulled out his phone to call Aisha. "How's my favorite captain?" she answered, pride evident in her voice. "Just checking in before the big one," Marcus replied. "How are the kids?" "Jada's still sleeping, got in late from study group, and Michael called from college. Said to tell you congratulations. Said his engineering professor used your story in class yesterday, about perseverance." Marcus felt a surge of emotion. Michael, his son, attending Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University on scholarship. Jada, his daughter, recently accepted to Howard University with dreams of becoming an aviation attorney. His children were achieving what his generation could only imagine. "Tell them I love them," he said. "And I'll be home for dinner. On time. Always punctual," Aisha laughed. "That's my Marcus." Punctuality was his signature. In 20 years, he'd never been late for a flight. Even when faced with mechanical issues, weather delays, or traffic, Captain Washington found a way to keep schedules intact. It was another standard he held himself to, knowing that for a black captain, tardiness wouldn't be forgiven as easily as it might be for his white colleagues. He headed toward the pre-flight briefing room, mentally reviewing today's flight plan: Chicago to Phoenix, standard route, possible weather systems developing in the southwest. As he walked through the terminal, he noted the familiar subtle reactions, the double takes from passengers, the surprised expressions quickly masked, the occasional warmth from black travelers who'd make eye contact, nod, and smile with quiet pride. 20 years. And still, his uniform didn't fully shield him from being seen as an anomaly first, a professional second. But today wasn't about that. Today was flight number 10,000. A perfect day to remember why all the struggle had been worth it. The briefing room door swung open, revealing his crew for today's milestone flight. 3 familiar faces, and one that made his heart sink slightly. Veronica Miller. "Captain," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "How unexpected to have you on this route." In his 20 years at Elite, Veronica was the only flight attendant who'd ever filed formal complaints against him. Twice for unprofessional communication, when he'd corrected safety procedures she'd neglected. Both complaints were dismissed, but the pattern was clear. "Good morning, Ms. Miller," he replied professionally. "Let's have a great flight today." Ramirez caught his eye with a sympathetic glance. Everyone knew Veronica's reputation, especially among minority crew members. But with 25 years of seniority, she was untouchable. The perfect flight Marcus had envisioned for his milestone suddenly seemed less certain. As he began the briefing, he pushed the thought aside. 10,000 flights. Not even Veronica Miller could take that accomplishment away from him. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Marcus Washington speaking. Welcome aboard Elite Airways Flight 2187 from Chicago to Phoenix. Our flight time today will be approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes. We're expecting some weather systems near our destination, but we'll do our best to make this a smooth journey for you." Marcus completed his welcome announcement and set the microphone down, settling into the familiar rhythm of pre-flight procedures. First Officer Ramirez moved efficiently beside him, their partnership well practiced after dozens of flights together. "Weather report just updated," Ramirez noted. "Looks like that system over Phoenix is intensifying. Might need to plan for holding patterns." Marcus nodded, reviewing the latest meteorological data. "Let's load extra fuel. Better safe than rushed." The cockpit door opened, and Veronica Miller stepped in. Protocol required the lead flight attendant to check in before departure, but her timing was premature. They were still completing essential safety checks. "We're boarding now, Captain," she announced, emphasizing his title with a subtle inflection that somehow made it sound less than respectful. "Several VIP passengers in first class today. The regional vice president of sales is in 2A. "Thank you, Ms. Miller," Marcus replied evenly. "We'll be ready for an on-time departure." She lingered, watching as he continued his checklist. "Are you sure about that weather delay you mentioned? The passengers are already asking questions. It looks clear outside." "The weather concern is in Phoenix, not Chicago," he explained patiently. "We're monitoring it closely." "Well, just so you know, we've promised an on-time arrival to our VIPs," she said, before turning to leave. Ramirez raised an eyebrow after the door closed. "Did she just try to pressure you about a weather situation?" "Not the first time," Marcus replied, returning to his checklist. "Won't be the last." The boarding process completed smoothly, and Flight 2187 pushed back from the gate precisely on schedule. Marcus navigated through Chicago's morning traffic with practiced precision, and soon they were airborne, climbing toward their cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. 2 hours into the flight, the air traffic control update confirmed his concerns. Elite 2187, Phoenix approach. Be advised we're experiencing significant thunderstorm activity and wind shear alerts. Expect holding patterns and possible diversion. Roger that, Phoenix approach. Elite 2187 acknowledging weather advisory. Request updated routing, Marcus responded. He switched to the cabin announcement system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington. As anticipated, we're encountering weather delays around Phoenix. Air traffic control has requested we enter a holding pattern while they manage the congestion. We've planned for this possibility and have plenty of fuel. Safety is our top priority, and we'll keep you updated as we receive more information." As he completed the announcement, the cabin interphone buzzed. Veronica again. "Captain, passengers are getting restless. The executive in 2A is asking why we can't just land. He says he flew into Phoenix yesterday with no problems." Marcus kept his voice level. "Please inform him that weather conditions change rapidly, and we're following air traffic control instructions. Every flight is different. He says his meeting is worth millions to the company. His life is worth more, Marcus replied firmly. We don't compromise safety for meetings. The holding pattern lasted 45 minutes, standard procedure during severe weather. When Phoenix approach finally cleared them for landing, conditions remained challenging with gusty crosswinds and moderate turbulence. Nice and easy, Marcus murmured, primarily to himself. With over 30,000 hours in the cockpit, including his military experience, he'd landed in far worse conditions. Still, each difficult landing required complete concentration. The Boeing 737 descended through patches of turbulence, the aircraft occasionally buffeting in the unsettled air. Marcus made minute adjustments, compensating for wind shifts, keeping the approach stable despite the challenging conditions. Crosswind from the right, 15 knots, Ramirez called out. Compensating, Marcus responded, adjusting the controls with practiced precision. The runway appeared through breaks in the clouds, rain streaking across the windshield. With gentle but firm control inputs, Marcus guided the aircraft down, touching the main landing gear exactly on the center line with minimal bounce, a textbook crosswind landing that drew an appreciative nod from Ramirez. Smooth as silk, Captain, especially in these conditions. As they taxied to the gate, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of a challenging job well done. Despite the weather delays, they'd arrived safely, the only metric that truly mattered. The post-flight procedures went normally until Marcus overheard Veronica speaking to deplaning passengers near the cockpit door. I apologize for the unnecessary delay, she was saying to the executive from 2A. Some pilots are overly cautious. If Captain Stevens had been flying today, I'm sure we would have been on time. The executive glanced toward Marcus, then back to Veronica. Is there really that much difference between pilots? Let's just say some are more confident in their abilities than others, she replied with a meaningful look. Marcus pretended not to hear, focusing on completing his logbook entries, but internally, his jaw clenched. The implication was clear and false. The delay had been mandated by air traffic control, not pilot discretion. And the comparison to Stevens, one of the few white captains who'd faced actual disciplinary action for pushing weather limitations, was particularly galling. As the last passengers deplaned, Marcus gathered his belongings, nodding professionally to the crew. Good job today, everyone. Safety first, always. Veronica's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course, Captain. Safety first. Something in her tone made him pause, but he continued toward the terminal. His 10,000th flight was complete. Not exactly the celebration he'd imagined, but another safe landing added to his perfect record. He couldn't have known that Veronica was already drafting a formal complaint that would threaten everything he'd worked for. Marcus's phone rang at 6:12 a.m. the following morning. The screen displayed Chief Pilot Office, an unusual time for a routine call. Captain Washington speaking, he answered, instantly alert. Marcus, it's Derek Sullivan. I need you to come. In this morning, 8 o'clock sharp. The chief pilot's tone was clipped, professional but cool. They'd never been close. Sullivan had been promoted over Marcus despite having significantly less experience, but they maintained cordial working relationships. May I ask what this is regarding? Marcus inquired, already calculating how to adjust his family's morning routine for this unexpected meeting. We'll discuss it when you arrive, Sullivan replied before ending the call. Aisha watched him from across their kitchen, concern evident in her expression. What's wrong? Not sure, Marcus said, placing his phone down. Chief Pilot wants to see me this morning. On your day off? After your milestone flight? That's strange timing. Marcus shrugged, but a knot formed in his stomach. In aviation, unexpected meetings were rarely positive. Maybe they finally realized they should have celebrated your 10,000th, Aisha suggested, trying to lighten the mood. Marcus smiled without conviction. Maybe. 3 hours later, he sat across from Derek Sullivan in the sterile conference room of Elite Airways administrative offices. The chief pilot's expression was grave as he slid a folder across the polished table. We've received a serious complaint about your conduct on yesterday's flight to Phoenix, Sullivan began. Veronica Miller has filed a formal report alleging You fabricated weather conditions to justify delays. Marcus stared at him, momentarily speechless. That's completely false, he finally managed. Phoenix was experiencing severe weather. Air traffic control ordered the holding pattern, not me. Sullivan's expression remained impassive. Ms. Miller claims you exaggerated conditions unnecessarily, causing delays that impacted high-value customers. She states you rejected her professional input about passenger concerns. Rejected her? Marcus stopped himself, taking a deep breath. The weather conditions were verified by air traffic control. All communications are recorded. This accusation is baseless. She's also provided statements from 3 passengers who support her version of events. Sullivan continued, as if Marcus hadn't spoken, including our regional VP of sales who was on board. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated attack. Those passengers have no way to assess actual weather conditions or air traffic control directives, Marcus explained carefully. And with all due respect to Ms. Miller, flight attendants don't make determinations about flight safety or routing. Sullivan leaned back in his chair. Ms. Miller has 25 years of experience. She claims you endangered passengers by creating unnecessary turbulence during your approach, and that you dismissed her concerns about passenger comfort. That's absurd, Marcus replied, struggling to maintain his professional tone. The aircraft's flight data recorder will show we experienced moderate turbulence exactly as forecast by meteorology. My landing was textbook despite challenging crosswinds. She says you had personal reasons for delaying the flight, Sullivan continued, his tone suddenly more pointed. Something about wanting recognition for your 10,000th flight. The accusation was so outlandish that Marcus almost laughed. I didn't even mention my milestone to the passengers. How would delaying a flight bring recognition? Sullivan shrugged. I'm just telling you what's in the report. Chief, this is easily disproven. Check the weather reports, listen to the ATC recordings, review the flight data. This complaint has no merit. We'll investigate, Sullivan said, his tone suggesting he was being magnanimous. But given the seriousness of the allegations and the prominence of the witnesses, I have no choice but to place you on administrative suspension pending our review. Suspension? Marcus echoed in disbelief. For following standard safety protocols? For alleged falsification of weather conditions and endangering passengers, Sullivan corrected. Effective immediately. I'll need your company ID. Marcus felt as though he were watching the scene from outside his body. 20 years of flawless service, and he was being suspended based on accusations that could be disproven in minutes with readily available data. How long will this investigation take? He asked, struggling to keep his voice even. These things are thorough. Could be a few weeks. Could be longer. As Marcus reluctantly handed over his Elite Airways identification badge, he noticed something shift in the atmosphere of the room. 2 security officers appeared in the doorway. Standard procedure for suspended employees, Sullivan explained, not quite meeting Marcus's eyes. They'll escort you out. The humiliation of being walked through the operations center, past colleagues and crew members who'd known him for decades, burned like acid. Whispers followed in his wake. By tomorrow, everyone would know Captain Washington had been suspended. 20 years of reputation destroyed in 20 minutes. Would this have happened if he were white? If those passengers had seen a white captain making the exact same safety decisions? If it had been a white captain being accused by a black flight attendant? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated differently at work because of their race? Comment number 1, if you've seen racial bias in action in your workplace. Or number 2, if you believe workplaces today are generally fair. Don't forget to like this video if you're outraged by what happened to Captain Washington. Subscribe to see how he fights back against this injustice. But the question remains, how would Marcus explain this humiliating suspension to his family? And would this destroy not only his career but his children's futures too? Let's find out. The garage door closed behind Marcus's car with a dull thud that seemed to finalize his new reality. He sat motionless in the driver's seat, hands still gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Suspended. After 20 spotless years. His house, The beautiful two-story colonial in Oak Park that represented decades of careful saving suddenly felt like it was built on quicksand. Their mortgage, Michael's college tuition, Jada's upcoming university costs, all depended on his captain's salary. The front door opened, and Aisha appeared, her expression shifting from welcome to concern as she registered his early return and the devastation on his face. "Marcus, what happened?" He couldn't bring himself to answer immediately. Instead, he slowly exited the car, walked to his wife and embraced her tightly, drawing strength from her steadiness. Inside, seated at their kitchen table, where just yesterday they'd celebrated his milestone, Marcus recounted the morning's events, each word painful to articulate. "Suspended?" Aisha repeated, her voice rising. "Based on a flight attendant's complaint with no evidence? That's outrageous." "They claim to be investigating," Marcus replied, but Sullivan had clearly already made his judgment. "What about the weather reports, the flight recordings, the data? All of that should exonerate me completely." But Sullivan acted like those were minor details compared to passenger statements. Aisha's eyes flashed with anger. "Passengers who have no idea about aviation safety or weather conditions. This is absurd, Marcus. It's discrimination, plain and simple." Before Marcus could respond, the front door opened again. Jada, their 17-year-old daughter, returned from her morning run, wireless earbuds still in place. She pulled them out upon seeing both parents home mid-morning on a weekday. "Dad, why are you home? Is everything okay?" Marcus and Aisha exchanged glances. They'd always been honest with their children about the realities of racism in America. It was a necessary survival conversation in black families, but this hit painfully close to home. "Sit down, honey," Marcus said gently. "Something's happened at work." Jada listened intently as her father explained the situation, her expression gradually hardening. "So this white flight attendant lied about you, and they just believed her?" "Without checking facts first," she summarized, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The investigation is ongoing," Marcus qualified, attempting to model the professionalism he'd always maintained. "But they suspended you first," Jada pressed, "before investigating. They assumed you were guilty." "Yes," Marcus admitted. "They did." "Because you're black," Jada stated flatly. It wasn't a question. The silence that followed confirmed her assessment. Eventually, Marcus nodded. "That's probably a factor," he acknowledged. "But we don't know for sure and we can't prove it." "We shouldn't have to prove it," Jada exclaimed, tears forming. "It's 2025, Dad. This shouldn't still be happening." Marcus reached across the table, taking his daughter's hand. Her acceptance letter to Howard University's pre-law program, her dream school, had arrived just last month. They'd planned to hang it on the wall alongside Michael's Embry-Riddle acceptance from 3 years earlier. "Is this going to affect my college?" Jada asked quietly, voicing the concern that had been weighing on Marcus since leaving Sullivan's office. "No," Aisha interjected firmly. "Absolutely not. We have savings. We'll make it work." But Marcus knew their savings wouldn't last long with a mortgage, car payments, and 2 college tuitions. Elite Airways' suspension policy meant he'd receive only basic benefits, no flight pay, which constituted the majority of his income. That evening, Marcus placed a video call to Michael at Embry-Riddle. His son's reaction mirrored Jada's initial disbelief, followed by a deeper, more resigned anger. "I literally just gave a presentation on the history of black pilots in America," Michael said. "The professor asked us to research barriers in aviation. I talked about how things had improved. Used you as the example, Dad." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. "Things have improved," he insisted. "I've had opportunities your grandfather couldn't have imagined." "But they're still treating you like it's 1950, Michael countered. "One white woman makes an accusation, and your whole career is in jeopardy?" After the call ended, Marcus retreated to his home office. Sleep would be impossible without action. He began methodically gathering evidence, downloading weather reports for Phoenix the previous day, requesting his flight data through Pilot. Union channels, searching for air traffic control recordings that would confirm his account. Around midnight, Aisha brought him a cup of tea, settling into the chair beside his desk. "I spoke with my brother," she said quietly. "He knows a good employment attorney." Marcus nodded absently, eyes fixed on his computer screen. "I found something interesting," he said, pointing to a forum for airline employees. "Veronica Miller has a reputation. There are comments here from other crew members, mostly minorities, who've had issues with her. Document everything," Aisha advised. "And Marcus, we need to prepare for this to get ugly. If she's targeting you because of race, this isn't going to be resolved quickly or cleanly." Marcus leaned back, suddenly exhausted. "I've always played by the rules, Aisha. Kept my head down. Done everything twice as well as expected. Never given anyone reason to question my professionalism." "I know," she replied softly. "And that's exactly why you can't let this stand. Not just for yourself, but for Michael and Jada. For every black pilot who comes after you." Later that night, unable to sleep, Marcus stood in the doorway of Jada's bedroom. His daughter had plastered her walls with aviation posters alongside social justice quotes. Her desk displayed the Howard acceptance letter next to a childhood photo of her sitting in the Elite Airways cockpit simulator, Marcus's captain's hat comically large on her small head. The image sparked a memory, Jada at 8 years old, after her first visit to his workplace. "The other pilots don't look like you, Daddy," she'd observed with a child's innocent directness. "Not many," he'd confirmed. "But more than when I started. And maybe more still by the time you're grown. I want to help people like you," she'd declared. Make things fair. And now her dream of studying law, of fighting systemic inequities, might be derailed by the very injustice she hoped to combat. Marcus returned to his office, opening his email with renewed determination. He began composing messages to pilot, union representatives, to Elite's Human Resources Department, to fellow black pilots who might have insights on navigating discrimination complaints. As dawn broke over Chicago, Marcus Washington had not slept, but he had a plan. This wasn't just about his career anymore. It was about his children's future, about accountability, about whether equal opportunity truly existed in the skies above America. He would fight, methodically, professionally, relentlessly, just as he'd fought every other barrier in his path to the captain's seat. 3 days into his suspension, Marcus sat across from Gabrielle Torres in her downtown Chicago law office. The aviation attorney's reputation for handling discrimination cases had preceded her, but her direct approach still caught him slightly off guard. "Let's be clear about something up front, Captain Washington," Torres said, reviewing his documentation. "What we're dealing with isn't just a miscommunication or personal vendetta. This has all the markers of racial discrimination, but proving that will be challenging." Marcus nodded. After 20 years in aviation, he understood the difference between knowing something and proving it. "I've reviewed your evidence," Torres continued. "The weather reports unequivocally support your decision to enter a holding pattern. The ATC recordings confirm you were following direct instructions. The flight data recorder shows appropriate responses to turbulence during approach and landing. Technically, this should be open and shut." "But it isn't," Marcus concluded. "No," Torres agreed. "Because this isn't really about weather or flight safety. It's about who gets believed without question and who gets suspended first and investigated later." She tapped her tablet, bringing up a spreadsheet. "I've been doing some research. In the past 5 years, Elite Airways has suspended 17 pilots pending investigations. 14 were minorities. Of those 14, only 3 were ultimately cleared without disciplinary action after lengthy investigations. Meanwhile, the 3 white pilots were all cleared within days, 2 with formal apologies." The statistics weren't surprising to Marcus, but seeing them quantified still struck him like a physical blow. "We need more," Torres advised. "This pattern suggests discrimination, but courts want smoking guns. Have you reached out to other pilots who've dealt with this flight attendant?" "I've started to," Marcus confirmed. James Chen responded first. "He's a Chinese-American captain who had a run-in with Miller last year. She filed a complaint saying he was unprofessional and aggressive when he corrected her about a safety procedure. What happened with his case? Nothing official. He was informally advised to improve communication with senior cabin crew. But he said several other Asian and Hispanic pilots have mentioned similar experiences with her. Torres made notes. Good. We need to establish a pattern of behavior. What about this chief pilot, Sullivan? Any history there? Marcus hesitated. Nothing I can prove. He was promoted to chief pilot 3 years ago despite several more experienced candidates, including me. Since then, minority pilot advancement has slowed noticeably. Interesting, Torres murmured. Any personal connection between Sullivan and Miller? Not that I know of. Torres nodded, continuing to make notes. I'm going to request Miller's personnel file through legal channels, specifically any previous complaints filed against minority crew members. We'll also subpoena Elite's promotion records and suspension statistics, broken down by race. Will that be enough? Marcus asked. It's a start, Torres replied. But we need more direct evidence of discrimination. What about the flight deck audio recordings? All cockpit communications are recorded, right? Yes, but those are typically only reviewed after incidents or accidents. Let's request them anyway. If Miller came into the cockpit making disparaging comments or pressuring you about the weather situation, that could be valuable. For the next week, Marcus worked tirelessly with Torres, building their case methodically. Each day brought new pieces to the puzzle. James Chen connected them with 5 other minority pilots who'd experienced similar treatment from Veronica Miller. Each pilot provided detailed accounts of her behavior, subtle undermining, complaints over minor issues, different standards for white versus minority flight crew. She seems to target successful minority pilots specifically, observed Captain Lakshmi Patel, the only female Indian-American captain at Elite. The more accomplished you are, the more she seems determined to find fault. Marcus reviewed flight logs, discovering that Miller had been on crew rotation with an unusually high percentage of minority captains over the past 3 years, far beyond statistical probability. She's selecting these flights deliberately, Torres concluded, requesting specific assignments where she knows minority captains will be in command. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a junior flight attendant named Tyler Jenkins who had trained under Miller. I was uncomfortable with how she talked about certain pilots, Jenkins explained in his sworn statement. She would make comments like, "These diversity hires need extra watching," or "Some people only got their wings because of their skin color." When I objected once, she said I needed to understand how standards had slipped since the company began its diversity initiatives. Torres was particularly interested in Jenkins' account of a conversation he'd overheard between Miller and Chief Pilot Sullivan at a company function. They seemed very familiar, Jenkins recalled. Miller was complaining about unqualified pilots, being promoted too quickly, and Sullivan was agreeing with her. Then she said something like, "We need to protect our legacy at Elite." And Sullivan responded, "One problem at a time, V." V, Torres repeated. That suggests a personal relationship. They went to the event together, Jenkins confirmed. Everyone knows they're close friends. They were in the same hiring class 25 years ago. This revelation changed the complexion of the investigation entirely. If Sullivan and Miller had a personal relationship, his immediate acceptance of her complaint without standard verification took on a more sinister aspect. Torres immediately filed additional discovery requests focusing on communications between Sullivan and Miller regarding pilot evaluations and complaints. Meanwhile, Marcus had been examining the flight deck recordings from his Phoenix flight. After multiple reviews, he identified something significant during the pre-flight checks. "Listen to this section," he told Torres, playing the audio. In the recording, Miller could be heard entering the cockpit, ostensibly for routine communication. But as she was leaving, she muttered something barely audible. Another diversity captain playing it safe. Torres's eyes widened. That's explicit bias. She entered the flight already prejudiced against your decision-making. The most damning evidence came when they finally obtained records of previous complaints filed by Miller. Over her 25-year career, she had filed 27 formal complaints against flight crew members. 24 were against minorities. Not a single complaint had been filed against a white male captain over the age of 50. This goes beyond individual racism, Torres said grimly, reviewing the statistics. This is systematic. Miller files complaints. Sullivan fast-tracks investigations against minorities while slow-walking those against white crew members. The pattern is undeniable. As their case strengthened, Marcus received an unexpected email from another elite employee, an administrative assistant in the flight operations department who wished to remain anonymous. "Captain Washington," the email began, "I've been disturbed by what's happening to you. You should know that on the morning after your Phoenix flight, before Ms. Miller even submitted her formal complaint, Chief Pilot Sullivan was already discussing your suspension with HR. I overheard him say, 'We finally have something concrete on Washington.'" This seemed predetermined, not investigative. Marcus forwarded the email to Torres, who immediately added it to their growing evidence file. "We're building a compelling case," she told him during their next meeting. "But Elite will fight this aggressively. They'll claim Miller's complaints were made in good faith, that Sullivan was following standard protocols. They'll cite their diversity initiatives as evidence they don't discriminate." "So what's our next step?" Marcus asked. "Normally, I'd recommend filing an EEOC complaint, then a lawsuit," Torres replied. "But given the structure of Elite Airways, there might be another approach." She pulled up Elite's corporate organizational chart. Derek Sullivan reports to the VP of Flight Operations, who reports to the COO, who reports to the CEO. But Elite is privately owned by Thomas Richards, who technically outranks all of them. Richards isn't involved in day-to-day operations, Marcus pointed out. He's semi-retired. True, but he still holds final authority, and from what I've researched, he's been a proponent of diversity in aviation. His daughter is actually a pilot for a competing airline. Marcus considered this information carefully. Going above his direct management chain carried significant risks, but after everything he'd uncovered, standard channels seemed unlikely to deliver justice. "If we take this directly to Richards," Torres continued, "with all our evidence organized and verified, we might bypass the institutional barriers protecting Miller and Sullivan." "That's a big gamble," Marcus observed. "If Richards sides with his management team, I'll be permanently blacklisted." "True," Torres acknowledged. "But if he's the man his public statements suggest, he won't tolerate systematic discrimination in his company." Marcus thought about his children, about Michael presenting on the history of black pilots, about Jada dreaming of fighting injustice through law. He thought about Captain Reynolds and all the barriers that had been broken to create opportunities for pilots like him. "Let's do it," he decided. "Prepare everything for Richards. If Elite Airways wants to defend discrimination, rather than address it, I need to know that now." Torres nodded approvingly. "I'll draft a comprehensive brief, but you should write a personal letter as well. Your experience, your record, what this has cost you and your family." That evening, Marcus sat at his desk, composing the most important letter of his career. He didn't just detail the evidence of discrimination. He wrote about his love of flying, his commitment to safety, his pride in representing Elite Airways for 20 years. "This isn't just about my career," he wrote in conclusion. "It's about whether Elite Airways truly believes in equal opportunity and evaluation based on performance rather than prejudice. It's about whether the company I've served loyally for 2 decades sees me as a valued captain or a diversity hire, to be held to different standards. I believe you value truth and fairness, Mr. Richards. I'm asking for nothing more than that." As he sealed the envelope containing both his letter and Torres's meticulously prepared evidence file, Marcus felt a strange mixture of dread and hope. 20 years of exemplary service had led to this moment, reaching out directly to the owner of Elite Airways, with proof that racism still determined who belonged in the captain's seat. Tomorrow, the package would be delivered to Thomas Richards's office. Then all Marcus could do was wait and hope that justice would finally prevail at 30,000 feet. The Elite Airways corporate headquarters dominated Chicago's downtown skyline, 60 stories of glass and steel projecting power, stability, and unwavering confidence. Inside, the 23rd floor housed the Human Resources Department, where Marcus and Gabrielle Torres, now sat in a sterile conference room facing a panel of 3 HR executives. "We've reviewed your concerns, Captain Washington," began Eleanor Winters, the Senior Vice President of Human Resources. Her voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who had mediated countless workplace disputes. "While we take allegations of discrimination very seriously, our preliminary investigation doesn't support your characterization of events." Marcus maintained his professional composure, though beneath the table, his fist clenched involuntarily. They'd submitted overwhelming evidence: flight records, weather reports, air traffic control communications, statistical analyses of Miller's complaint history, testimonials from other minority pilots. Yet Winters spoke as if they'd offered mere conjecture. "With all due respect," Torres interjected, "what specific evidence contradicts our documentation? The weather reports clearly confirm Captain Washington's account. The flight data recorder validates his handling of the aircraft. Multiple witnesses have attested to Ms. Miller's pattern of targeting minority pilots." Winters exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. "We've interviewed Ms. Miller extensively. She stands by her assessment that Captain Washington's decision-making was compromised. She's a 25-year employee with an exemplary service record." "So is Captain Washington," Torres countered. 20 years without a single substantiated complaint. Perfect safety record. Consistently positive passenger feedback. Yet he was suspended immediately, while Ms. Miller's extensive history of filing complaints exclusively against minority crew members wasn't even considered relevant. The second HR executive, a younger man named Brian Phillips, leaned forward. "Ms. Torres, we understand your client is upset, but characterizing standard safety protocols as discriminatory is a serious leap." Chief Pilot Sullivan followed established procedures for investigating safety concerns. "Did those procedures include consulting weather reports, reviewing air traffic control communications, examining flight data?" Torres asked pointedly. "Or did they begin and end with accepting Ms. Miller's account without verification?" An uncomfortable silence followed. "Our investigation is ongoing," Winters finally stated. "But based on passenger statements supporting Ms. Miller's account, we believe the suspension remains appropriate at this time." Marcus spoke for the first time since introductions. "May I ask which passengers provided these statements?" Phillips consulted his tablet. "We have signed statements from 3 first-class passengers, including our regional VP of sales." "And did anyone ask these passengers about their qualifications to assess weather conditions or flight safety parameters?" Marcus inquired evenly. "Did anyone inform them that Phoenix Air Traffic Control had mandated our holding pattern, not pilot discretion?" "Passengers can recognize unnecessary turbulence and delays, Captain," the third executive commented. "Actually, they cannot," Marcus replied. "Passengers have no way to distinguish between necessary turbulence during approach in challenging conditions versus, as Ms. Miller claimed, unnecessary turbulence. That's why we have objective flight data, which confirms my approach and landing were textbook, despite difficult crosswinds." Torres slid a document across the table. "We've obtained the actual passenger comment cards from the flight in question. Interesting that while Ms. Miller collected statements from 3 first-class passengers, she ignored 27 positive comments specifically mentioning Captain Washington's clear communication about the weather delays and his smooth landing in difficult conditions." The HR executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We'll add these to the file," Winters said, neither confirming nor denying they'd been aware of the positive comments. "While you're updating the file," Torres continued, "you might want to include this email we've obtained through Discovery." She slid another document forward. "It's from Chief Pilot Sullivan to Ms. Miller, sent hours before her formal complaint was filed, suggesting specific language she should use to frame her accusations." Phillips picked up the document, his expression carefully neutral as he read. "This appears to be regular correspondence between a department head and a senior employee. Regular correspondence that outlines a strategy for building a case against Captain Washington before any formal complaint existed," Torres challenged. "That establishes the disciplinary outcome before any investigation began? You're interpreting standard procedural guidance as something nefarious," Winters replied dismissively. "Then explain this," Torres countered. producing another document. An email chain between Mr. Sullivan and the VP of Flight Operations discussing how to manage the Washington situation dated 3 weeks before the Phoenix flight. They specifically mention waiting for an actionable complaint to address the diversity promotion problem. This finally cracked Winter's professional veneer. "Where did you obtain this?" she demanded. "These are confidential internal communications." They were provided by a concerned employee who was disturbed by the company's apparent targeting of minority pilots, Torres explained. "We have several such whistleblowers now." The atmosphere in the room had shifted palpably. What had begun as a perfunctory dismissal of Marcus's concerns had evolved into something far more serious. "We'll need time to review these new materials," Winters stated, her tone considerably less confident. "Of course," Torres agreed. "We also have this audio recording from Captain Washington's flight deck, capturing Ms. Miller making explicitly biased comments about diversity captains." She placed a final USB drive on the table. "I suggest you review it carefully." As the meeting concluded, Marcus and Torres were asked to wait in a separate room while the HR team conferred. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see them making urgent phone calls, their body language betraying their concern. "They're calling legal," Torres observed, "and probably Sullivan. They weren't prepared for the evidence we have." After 40 minutes, they were escorted back to the conference room, where only Winters remained. "In light of the additional documentation you've provided," she began carefully, "we're expanding our investigation. Captain Washington's suspension will continue, but with pay, while we examine these new allegations." "That's insufficient," Torres replied immediately. "We have clear evidence of discriminatory intent and procedural violations. Captain Washington should be reinstated immediately while Ms. Miller and Chief Sullivan are investigated." "That's not how our process works," Winters insisted. "We need to follow established protocols." "The same protocols that were ignored when Captain Washington was suspended without proper evidence review?" Torres asked. "The same protocols that apparently allow for targeting minority pilots for heightened scrutiny?" Winters' expression hardened. "Ms. Torres, Elite Airways takes these allegations very seriously. But we will conduct our investigation according to our established timeline and procedures." "And how long will that take?" Marcus inquired. "These matters are complex. 60 to 90 days would be standard." Torres shook her head. 3 months of career limbo while the people who orchestrated this situation remain in positions of power? That's unacceptable." "It's our standard process," Winters repeated. As they left the imposing Elite Airways headquarters, Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication that their evidence had clearly rattled the HR team, but frustration at the corporate stonewalling. "They're buying time," Torres observed, as they walked toward the parking garage. "Hoping this will go away or that you'll accept some minimal settlement rather than fight for full accountability." "What now?" Marcus asked. "We continue building our case. I'll file the EEOC complaint today. That starts the clock on potential legal action." That evening, checking his Elite employee email for the first time since the meeting, Marcus discovered something disturbing. A company-wide schedule update listed Veronica Miller as working her regular routes, including several with the minority pilots who had provided statements supporting Marcus. Meanwhile, an internal memo, accidentally included in an email thread Marcus was copied on, outlined talking points for management about recent personnel matters, instructing supervisors to emphasize that safety concerns must be taken seriously, regardless of an employee's background or tenure. The implication was clear. Elite was already framing Marcus's situation as a legitimate safety investigation rather than discrimination. More concerning still was an email Marcus received from Tyler Jenkins, the flight attendant who had provided testimony about Miller's biased comments. "Captain Washington," Jenkins wrote, "I wanted to let you know I've been reassigned to International. Routes effective immediately. They're saying it's a development opportunity, but the timing seems suspicious. I stand by my statement, but I thought you should know they're moving people around." Marcus forwarded the email to Torres, who responded within minutes. "Classic retaliation. They're isolating witnesses and controlling the narrative. We need to accelerate our timeline." 2 days later, Marcus received a call from James Chen, one of the pilots who had shared his experiences with Miller. "Washington, something weird is happening," Chen began without preamble. "HR called me in for a clarification meeting about my statement. They had printed copies of my private texts with another pilot discussing your case. They're monitoring. Communications, man." That same afternoon, 3 more pilots reported similar clarification meetings, each one subtly pressured to reconsider or modify their statements about Miller's behavior. When Marcus relayed these developments to Torres, she was silent for a long moment. "They're circling the wagons," she finally said. "This goes deeper than Miller and Sullivan. There's institutional resistance to addressing the discrimination issue. So what do we do? If they're willing to monitor communications and pressure witnesses, what's our recourse?" Torres considered the question carefully. "We have 2 options. We proceed with the EEOC complaint and subsequent lawsuit, which could take years to resolve and might result in a confidential settlement that doesn't create real change. Or what?" Marcus prompted. "Or we go directly to the top, not HR, not the executive team, straight to Thomas Richards himself." "The owner?" Marcus was skeptical. "He's semi-retired, probably insulated from day-to-day operations by layers of management." "Exactly," Torres replied, "which means he might not know what's happening in his company. Richards has a reputation for fairness. His public statements on diversity have been progressive, and unlike the executives who are busy protecting themselves and each other, he has the authority to resolve this immediately." "It's risky," Marcus observed. "If Richards sides with his management team, we lose our leverage for negotiation." "True," Torres acknowledged. "But from what I've seen, Elite's corporate structure is already mobilizing to bury this case in procedures and delays. Richards might be our best shot at cutting through that." Marcus thought about his children, about the tuition payments coming due, about the message his case was sending about whether justice was possible for Black professionals who played by the rules. He thought about the younger minority pilots at Elite, who were watching his situation as a bellwether for their own futures. "Let's do it," he decided. "Let's contact Richards directly." The next morning, Marcus personally delivered a comprehensive package to Thomas Richards's private office. It contained everything: the weather reports, flight data, witness statements, emails showing coordination between Miller and Sullivan, statistics on disparate treatment of minority pilots, and a personal letter explaining how 20 years of exemplary service had been dismissed based on demonstrably false accusations. The final line of his letter read, "Mr. Richards, I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal treatment, for the same benefit of the doubt, the same procedural protections, the same respect for my professional judgment that my white colleagues receive automatically. If Elite Airways truly values diversity and excellence, this situation demands your personal attention." Now all Marcus could do was wait, and hope that somewhere within Elite Airways' corporate hierarchy, fairness still mattered more than protecting the status quo. Have you ever had to bypass normal channels to get justice in your workplace? Comment number 1 if you've had to go over someone's head to resolve discrimination, or number 2 if you found HR departments generally helpful in addressing bias. Hit that like button if you're rooting for Captain Washington to clear his name. Subscribe to see whether the airline owner will finally deliver justice. But now we have to wonder, will this bold move pay off, or will going straight to the owner backfire catastrophically? How will Richards respond when he discovers what's happening in his company? Let's continue this journey. For 3 days after delivering his package to Thomas Richards's office, Marcus heard nothing. The silence felt ominous. Perhaps his direct appeal had been intercepted by gatekeepers, or worse, forwarded back to the very executives he was reporting. On the morning of the 4th day, Marcus's phone rang while he was helping Jada prepare for a scholarship interview. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. "Captain Washington speaking," he answered professionally. "Captain Washington. This is Amanda Reeves, executive assistant to Thomas Richards," a crisp voice responded. "Mr. Richards has reviewed your materials and would like to meet with you personally this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Can you make yourself available?" Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. "Yes, absolutely. Please come to the private entrance at Richards Tower. I'll meet you in the lobby." After ending the call, Marcus stood motionless in his kitchen, processing the implications. Thomas Richards, the founder and owner of Elite Airways, wanted to meet him personally. After weeks of institutional stonewalling, this represented either a breakthrough or the final nail in the coffin of his career. "Dad, who was that?" Jada asked, noting his expression. "Thomas Richards' office. He wants to meet with me today." Jada's eyes widened. "The owner himself? That's huge." "It could be," Marcus cautioned, not wanting to raise false hopes. "Or it could be a courtesy dismissal." "No way," Jada insisted. "If he was going to blow you off, he'd have his people do it. A personal meeting means he's taking this seriously." Marcus called Torres immediately to share the development. "This is significant," the attorney agreed. "Richards rarely involves himself in operational matters. The fact that he's meeting you directly suggests your evidence made an impression." "Should you come with me?" Marcus asked. "No," Torres advised after a moment's consideration. "Richards requested you specifically, not your legal representation. This is more personal than procedural. If he wanted a legal discussion, he'd have his attorneys present and would have requested mine as well. So how should I approach this?" "Be yourself," Torres suggested. "Professional, factual, dignified. Exactly the qualities that made you an exceptional captain for 20 years. Don't focus on potential compensation or settlements. Focus on the systemic issues and your desire to ensure fairness for all pilots at Elite." At 1:30 that afternoon, Marcus arrived at Richards' Tower in downtown Chicago. The imposing 80-story building housed not only Elite Airways executive offices, but also Richards' numerous other business interests. The private entrance featured subtle security, no metal detectors or uniformed guards, but observant staff and discreet cameras monitored all movement. Marcus approached the reception desk, where a young woman smiled professionally. "Good afternoon. I'm Captain Marcus Washington, here to see Mr. Richards." Before the receptionist could respond, a door opened, revealing a tall, elegant black woman in her 50s. "Captain Washington, I'm Amanda Reeves. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please follow me." As they walked toward a private elevator, Marcus noted that Reeves wore an Elite Airways service pin indicating 30 years with the company, longer than he'd been there. "Mr. Richards appreciates your directness in bringing these matters to his attention," Reeves commented as they ascended. "He values people who demonstrate conviction." The elevator opened directly into a tasteful reception area on the 78th floor. Reeves led Marcus to a set of double doors, knocked once, and opened them without waiting for a response. Thomas Richards' office was unexpectedly understated. Spacious but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Chicago. Richards himself stood gazing out at the skyline, a tall man in his 70s with silver hair and the straight posture of someone who'd never stopped working despite his wealth. He turned as they entered, his expression thoughtful rather than imposing. "Captain Washington," he said, crossing the room to shake Marcus's hand firmly. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Richards gestured toward a small conference table rather than his desk, a subtle but meaningful choice that established a more equal conversational setting. "Would you like coffee? Water?" Richards offered. "Water would be fine, thank you," Marcus replied, maintaining his professional composure despite the surreal nature of sitting across from the billionaire owner of Elite Airways. After Reeves delivered their drinks and departed, closing the doors, behind her, Richards leaned forward slightly. "I've reviewed your materials thoroughly, Captain. 20 years of exemplary service, over 30,000 flight hours, perfect safety record, 10,000 commercial flights without incident." He paused. "That's quite an achievement." "Thank you, sir," Marcus responded. "And yet," Richards continued, "after all that, you were suspended based on a complaint that contradicts objective weather data, air traffic control records, and flight telemetry." His tone wasn't accusatory but puzzled, as if trying to reconcile an inconsistency. "That's correct," Marcus confirmed. Richards nodded slowly. I founded Elite Airways 45 years ago with 2 leased aircraft and a commitment to excellence and fairness. Somewhere along the way, it seems those values have become selective in their application. He stood, walking to retrieve a folder from his desk. After receiving your package, I had my personal team conduct an independent review. Separate from HR, separate from flight operations. The results are disturbing. Richards opened the folder, revealing charts and statistics. In the past 5 years, minority pilots at Elite have been subjected to disciplinary investigations at 4 times the rate of their white colleagues. Their investigations average 72 days, while white pilots' investigations average 11 days. Promotion rates show similar disparities. Marcus remained silent, allowing Richards to continue his assessment. Ms. Miller, it seems, has filed 27 formal complaints in her career, 24 against minority crew members. That's not coincidence, Captain Washington, that's pattern. No, sir, it's not coincidence, Marcus agreed quietly. Richards closed the folder. I'm not naive, Captain. I understand that institutional biases exist even in companies I own. But what troubles me most isn't just the discrimination itself, it's how vigorously the system has defended it when challenged. He looked directly at Marcus. You shouldn't have needed to contact me directly. HR should have recognized the pattern. Sullivan should have verified the weather data before suspending you. The system should have protected excellence regardless of race. I agree, sir, Marcus said. My concern has never been just about my individual case, but about the environment it reveals. Richards nodded approvingly. Well said. He paused, seeming to make a decision. What I'm about to share isn't public knowledge, Captain. My daughter, Elise, is a pilot for Trans-Pacific Airlines. This was unexpected information. Richards rarely discussed his family publicly. She's one of very few black female captains in commercial aviation, Richards continued. She chose not to work for Elite specifically to avoid nepotism concerns, but she shared her experiences with discrimination throughout her career, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, always persistent. Richards's expression hardened slightly. When she described the barriers she faced, I wanted to believe Elite was different. I implemented diversity initiatives, inclusion training, recruitment programs. Apparently, I neglected to address the existing culture that views such initiatives as lowering standards rather than expanding opportunity. He looked at Marcus thoughtfully. Do you know why I wanted to meet you personally, Captain Washington? I imagine to assess the situation firsthand, sir. Partly, Richards acknowledged, but primarily because I wanted to apologize to you, directly. Not through lawyers or HR representatives. My company failed you after 20 years of exemplary service. That failure begins with me. Marcus hadn't expected this level of personal accountability from a billionaire who could easily have delegated the entire matter. I appreciate that, Mr. Richards, he responded carefully. But what matters most now is ensuring this doesn't happen to other pilots. Richards smiled slightly. Exactly the response I anticipated from you, Captain. Your reputation for professionalism is well earned. He pressed an intercom button. Amanda, please ask them to join us now. Within moments, the doors opened again. Amanda Reeves entered, followed by 3 people Marcus recognized immediately. Eleanor Winters from HR, Derek Sullivan, and Veronica Miller. Their expressions ranged from confusion to alarm when they spotted Marcus. Please, everyone take a seat, Richards directed, his tone shifting to something more authoritative. Once all were seated, Richards remained standing, commanding the room's attention. I've called you here because a situation has developed that requires immediate resolution, he began. Captain Washington has brought serious concerns to my attention regarding discriminatory practices within Elite Airways, specifically targeting minority pilots for heightened scrutiny, disciplinary action, and career obstruction. Sullivan started to speak, but Richards raised a hand, silencing him. I've conducted an independent investigation that confirms Captain Washington's allegations. The statistics are unambiguous. The documentary evidence is compelling. The pattern is undeniable. Winters leaned forward. Mr. Richards, if I may, our internal investigation is still ongoing. There are procedural considerations. Your internal investigation has been compromised from the start, Richards interrupted. My team has uncovered communications between Mr. Sullivan and Ms. Miller coordinating complaints against minority pilots. We've documented instances where HR ignored evidence favorable to minority crew members while expediting disciplinary actions against them. The room fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. Ms. Miller, Richards continued, turning his attention to the flight attendant. Your record shows 27 formal complaints filed during your career. 24 were against minority crew members. Would you care to explain that statistical anomaly? Miller's composure faltered. I report safety concerns regardless of who's involved. It's coincidental. 1 or 2 instances might be coincidence, Richards replied. 24 out of 27 defies mathematical probability. He turned to Sullivan. And you, as chief pilot, implemented immediate suspension for Captain Washington without reviewing readily available weather data or air traffic control communications that would have immediately exonerated him. Yet, when white captains face similar complaints, your records show you typically conduct preliminary investigations before taking disciplinary action. Sullivan's face reddened. Each situation is unique. Indeed they are, Richards agreed. Yet your responses follow a remarkably consistent pattern based on the race of the pilot involved. He addressed Winters next. And HR has repeatedly delayed investigations involving discrimination complaints while fast-tracking those against minority employees. That pattern exists across multiple departments, but is most pronounced in flight operations. Richards returned to his seat, surveying the group. Elite Airways was founded on principles of excellence and fairness. Somewhere along the way, we've allowed a culture to develop where excellence is recognized selectively and fairness is applied unequally. That ends today. He looked directly at Miller. Ms. Miller, your employment with Elite Airways is terminated, effective immediately. Your pattern of targeted complaints against minority crew members constitutes harassment and discrimination. Miller gasped. You can't, I have 25 years. 25 years during which you systematically undermined qualified pilots based on their race. Richards completed for her. Your seniority makes your behavior more egregious, not less. He turned to Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, you are removed as chief pilot, effective immediately. You'll be reassigned to training, where you'll participate in developing and implementing a comprehensive anti-bias program for all management personnel. Sullivan's face went from red to white. Sir, I've always followed company protocols. You've selectively applied protocols based on race, Richards corrected. That stops now. Finally, he addressed Winters. Ms. Winters, your department has failed in its fundamental obligation to ensure fair treatment of all employees. You have 2 weeks to present a complete overhaul of HR investigative procedures with specific protections against discriminatory application. Your continued employment depends on the thoroughness of that plan. Winters nodded stiffly, her professional mask finally cracking to reveal genuine concern. Amanda will see you out, Richards concluded. Please turn in your credentials at security. After the 3 stunned executives left, Richards turned back to Marcus. Captain Washington, on behalf of Elite Airways, I apologize for the treatment you've received. You are reinstated effective immediately, with full back pay and compensation for damages. Additionally, I'd like to offer you the position of Director of Pilot Development and Diversity Initiatives, reporting directly to me, not through the standard management chain. Marcus was momentarily speechless. The swiftness and completeness of the resolution exceeded his expectations entirely. That's extremely generous, Mr. Richards, he finally managed. It's not generosity, Captain Washington. It's recognition of excellence and an investment in Elite's future. We need leaders who understand both aviation and the challenges of building a truly equitable workplace. Richards extended his hand. Will you help me restore Elite Airways to what it should be? As Marcus shook Richards' hand, he felt the weight of 20 years. Every small indignity, every extra hurdle, every time he'd had to be twice as good for half the recognition, begin to lift. Yes, sir, he said firmly. I would be honored. As he left Richard's tower that afternoon, Marcus pulled out his phone to call Aisha with the life-changing news. But first he paused to send a message to Torres, whose belief in his case had never wavered. Justice prevailed today. Not just for me, but hopefully for every pilot who comes after me. Thank you for helping make that possible. For the first time since his suspension, Captain Marcus Washington looked up at the sky with anticipation rather than uncertainty. Soon he would be back where he belonged, not just in the cockpit, but in a position to ensure that the next generation of pilots would be judged solely by their skill and dedication, never by the color of their skin. 1 week after his meeting with Thomas Richards, Marcus found himself back at Elite Airways headquarters. This time, however, he didn't enter through the main employee entrance, but through the executive elevator, his new security clearance reflecting his position as Director of Pilot Development and Diversity Initiatives. The 73rd floor housed the company's main conference room, where today's emergency board meeting would take place. As Marcus approached, he could see through the glass walls that the room was already filling with Elite's top executives, many of whom he recognized but had never interacted with directly. Amanda Reeves met him at the door. "Good morning, Captain Washington. Mr. Richards asked that you sit here." She indicated a chair directly to the right of the head of the table, a position of prominence that caused several executives to exchange glances. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves," Marcus replied professionally, taking his seat and organizing his materials. Richards had asked him to prepare a presentation on the discrimination patterns they'd uncovered, and Marcus had spent days ensuring his data was irrefutable. The room gradually filled with senior management, the CEO, COO, CFO, and various vice presidents. Marcus noted their reactions to his presence ranged from curiosity to visible discomfort. None approached him directly. At precisely 9 o'clock, the door opened again, and Thomas Richards entered, followed by a young black woman in a pilot's uniform from Trans-Pacific Airlines. Marcus immediately recognized her as Richards' daughter Elise from news articles, though they'd never met personally. "Good morning, everyone," Richards began without preamble. "I've called this emergency session to address a critical failure within our organization, one that threatens our values, our reputation, and ultimately, our success." He gestured to Elise. "My daughter, Captain Elise Richards, has joined us today in her capacity as a diversity consultant, not as my family member. She has first-hand experience with the challenges minority pilots face in commercial aviation." Richards then nodded to Marcus. "And Captain Marcus Washington, whom many of you know by reputation if not personally, is now our Director of Pilot Development and Diversity Initiatives. He'll be leading our efforts to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices throughout Elite Airways." A subtle tension permeated the room. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Before we begin," Richards continued, "I want to make my position absolutely clear. Elite Airways will not tolerate discrimination in any form. Not subtle bias, not systemic barriers, not preferential treatment based on race, gender, or any other protected characteristic. Those who cannot or will not adapt to this standard have no place in our company's future." The CEO, James Harrington, cleared his throat. "Thomas, while I fully support equality initiatives, I'm concerned about the unprecedented nature of today's meeting. Normal channels exist for addressing HR concerns. Those normal channels have failed systematically," Richards interrupted. "Which is precisely why we're here." He nodded to Marcus. "Captain Washington, please begin your presentation." Marcus stood, activating the large display screen behind him. "Good morning. What I'm about to present isn't a matter of interpretation or opinion. It's data, objective, quantifiable, and disturbing." For the next 30 minutes, Marcus methodically outlined the evidence. Promotion rates for minority versus white pilots, disciplinary investigation durations, complaint resolution outcomes, all broken down by race. The numbers told an unmistakable story of systematic disadvantage. "As you can see," Marcus concluded, "a black pilot at Elite Airways is 4 times more likely to face disciplinary investigation than a white colleague with identical performance metrics. When investigated, their cases remain open 3 times longer. When promoted, they receive approximately 40% more performance reviews in their first year than white peers. These disparities cannot be explained by performance, experience, or any factor other than race. The room remained silent as the executives absorbed the implications. Finally, the Vice President of Flight Operations, Stephen Reynolds, Sullivan's direct superior, spoke up. These numbers are concerning, certainly, but they don't necessarily prove intentional discrimination. Correlation isn't causation. An excellent point, Marcus acknowledged, which is why we also examined specific cases where intent became explicit. He brought up a new slide showing email exchanges between Sullivan and Miller discussing how to manage the diversity problem and maintain standards despite diversity mandates. Next came audio recordings from cockpit voice recorders capturing Miller's comments about diversity captains and Sullivan's statements to other pilots about how standards had slipped since we started worrying about demographics. This isn't subtle bias, Marcus stated. This is overt discrimination, documented and undeniable. Reynolds's face had paled considerably. I was unaware of these communications. That's part of the problem, Richards interjected. This behavior flourished because accountability failed at multiple levels. The door opened again, and Derek Sullivan was escorted in by security. His expression hardened when he saw Marcus at the front of the room. Mr. Sullivan, Richards said, please take a seat. We're discussing the discriminatory practices you implemented as chief pilot. Sullivan remained standing. I've always followed company protocols. If those protocols resulted in disparate outcomes, that's a systemic issue beyond my control. Actually, Marcus replied, bringing up another slide, we've identified 43 instances where you deviated from standard protocols. In 41 cases, those deviations disadvantaged minority pilots or advantaged white pilots. Statistical analysis puts the probability of that pattern occurring randomly at less than 0.001%. Sullivan's composure began to crack. You're cherry-picking data to support a predetermined narrative. The narrative is written in your own words, Mr. Sullivan, Marcus responded calmly, displaying an email where Sullivan had written explicitly about finding reasons to weed out diversity hires who don't truly belong in the captain's seat. The conference room door opened once more, and Veronica Miller entered, escorted by another security officer. Unlike Sullivan, she appeared immediately defensive, her eyes darting around the room. Ms. Miller, Richards acknowledged, please join us. We're reviewing the pattern of complaints you've filed against minority pilots. Miller took a seat as far from Marcus as possible. I've only reported legitimate safety concerns, she insisted. It's not my fault if certain pilots happen to be minorities. 24 out of 27 complaints targeted minorities, Marcus stated, in a pilot population that was 18% minority during that period. The statistical improbability of that occurring randomly is astronomical. Elise Richards spoke for the first time. Ms. Miller, as a black female captain, I'm particularly interested in understanding your perspective. What specific behaviors did you observe in minority pilots that concerned you so frequently? Miller seemed taken aback by the direct question from Richards's daughter. They often seemed less confident in their decision-making, more hesitant. Interesting, Elise replied. Because the flight data shows that minority pilots at Elite have slightly better safety metrics than their white colleagues, fewer hard landings, better fuel efficiency, and fewer passenger complaints about turbulence. Data can be manipulated, Miller snapped, her composure beginning to crack. Like passenger statements? Marcus inquired, bringing up another slide. We've discovered that on Captain Washington's Phoenix flight, you collected negative comments from 3 first-class passengers while ignoring 27 positive comments. You then presented only the negative feedback as representative. Miller's face flushed. I reported what seemed relevant. What seemed to support your predetermined conclusion, Marcus corrected. Richards addressed the room at large. We've established a clear pattern of targeted discrimination. Now we must address both the specific case of Captain Washington and the broader systemic issues. He turned to Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, did you review the weather data for Phoenix before suspending Captain Washington? Sullivan hesitated, then admitted, No, I relied on Ms. Miller's report and passenger statements. Did you listen to air traffic control recordings confirming that holding patterns were mandated by ATC, not by Captain Washington's discretion? That wasn't deemed necessary at the preliminary stage, Sullivan replied evasively, yet for the 3 white captains who faced similar complaints in the past year, you personally reviewed all technical data before making any suspension decision, Richards noted. Why the different approach for Captain Washington? Sullivan's professional facade finally cracked. Because I've had concerns about Washington for years. He was promoted too quickly. The diversity initiative fast-tracked him when other pilots had waited longer. Captain Washington graduated top of his class, Marcus countered, displaying his personnel file. He had more flight hours than any other candidate in his promotion cohort. His technical evaluations were perfect. What specific qualification did he lack beyond being black? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Miller suddenly stood. This is a witch hunt. You've already decided we're racist without considering that maybe, just maybe, we were actually addressing legitimate concerns. Then let's address the most legitimate evidence of all, Richards said calmly, nodding to Marcus. Marcus brought up a final display. The complete air traffic control recording from the Phoenix flight, synchronized with weather radar imagery, and the flight data recorder information. The recording played through the room's speakers. Elite 2187, Phoenix approach. Be advised we're experiencing significant thunderstorm activity and wind shear alerts. Expect holding patterns and possible diversion. Roger that. Phoenix approach. Elite 2187 acknowledging weather advisory. Request updated routing. The radar clearly showed the severe weather system exactly as Marcus had described in his passenger announcements. The flight data recorder confirmed moderate to severe turbulence during approach, with Marcus's control inputs maintaining optimal stability despite challenging conditions. As the recording concluded with the air traffic controller commending the textbook crosswind landing, the room fell silent. Miller's face had lost all color. Sullivan stared at the table, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The evidence is conclusive, Richards stated. Captain Washington made appropriate safety decisions based on actual weather conditions and air traffic control directives. Any competent aviation professional would have made identical choices. Yet he was suspended without investigation. While Ms. Miller's demonstrably false claims were accepted without verification, he turned to the executives. This isn't just about Captain Washington. This is about whether Elite Airways is the company I founded, one where excellence and fairness apply equally to everyone, or whether we've become an organization that merely pretends to value diversity while systematically undermining it. Miller suddenly stood again, her composure completely shattered. You want to know the truth? Fine. Some of these pilots shouldn't be in the cockpit. They were hired to fill quotas, not because they were the best candidates. The room went completely silent at this outburst. Which pilots specifically weren't qualified, Ms. Miller? Elise Richards asked quietly. Captain Washington, with his perfect safety record and 10,000 flights. Or perhaps you mean me, graduate of the Air Force Academy with 15 years of commercial experience? The standards have been lowered, Miller insisted, her voice rising. Everyone knows it, but nobody will say it. The data shows precisely the opposite, Marcus replied calmly. Minority pilots at Elite have on average more training hours, more military experience, and better safety records than their white counterparts. They haven't benefited from lower standards. They've succeeded despite higher ones. Sullivan, seeing Miller's meltdown destroying any remaining credibility, attempted damage control. Ms. Miller's views don't represent official Elite policy. We've always maintained the highest professional standards for all pilots. Yet you implemented those standards differently based on race, Richards observed. The evidence is incontrovertible. He addressed the entire room. Elite Airways has a cancer growing within it, the cancer of discrimination masked as maintaining standards. Today, we begin the treatment. Richards outlined immediate changes. Sullivan's demotion and Miller's termination were merely the first steps. A comprehensive review of all disciplinary actions against minority employees over the past 5 years would begin immediately. Anti-bias training would become mandatory for all management. Promotion criteria would be standardized and transparent. Anonymous reporting channels would be established for employees experiencing discrimination. Captain Washington's reinstatement, with full back pay, is non-negotiable, Richards concluded. Additionally, he'll receive appropriate compensation for the damage to his reputation and the stress inflicted on his family. But more importantly, as our new Director of Pilot Development and Diversity Initiatives, he'll help ensure this never happens again. Miller, realizing her career was over, made one last desperate attempt. This isn't fair. 25 years of service and I'm fired because I reported legitimate concerns? I'll sue for wrongful termination. Richards regarded her calmly. Ms. Miller, we have documented evidence of you making explicitly biased statements about minority pilots. We have statistical proof of your targeted pattern of complaints. We have testimony from multiple witnesses about your discriminatory behavior. And most damningly, we have irrefutable evidence that your complaint against Captain Washington was factually false and motivated by racial bias. He paused. By all means, pursue legal action if you wish. We're fully prepared to make all of this evidence public in court. The fight visibly drained from Miller. Without another word, she turned and left the room, escorted by security. Sullivan, recognizing his position was equally untenable, adopted a more conciliatory tone. I accept the reassignment and will fully cooperate with the anti-bias program. Development. You'll do more than cooperate, Richards corrected. You'll become its most dedicated advocate, or you'll find employment elsewhere. Is that understood? Sullivan nodded stiffly. As the meeting concluded, many executives approached Marcus privately, offering congratulations on his new position and assurances of their support for the reforms. Whether motivated by genuine conviction or political survival instinct, their acknowledgement represented the beginning of actual change. Outside the conference room, Elise Richards introduced herself properly to Marcus. Captain Washington, it's an honor to meet you. My father has spoken highly of your professionalism and courage. The honor is mine, Captain Richards, Marcus replied. Your father mentioned your experiences in commercial aviation. I suspect they mirror many of my own. Elise smiled knowingly. The aviation industry has a long way to go, but today was a significant step forward, not just for Elite, but potentially as a model for other airlines. Thomas Richards joined them. Captain Washington, I'd like you to join me for lunch. We have much to discuss about implementing these changes effectively. As they walked toward the executive dining room, Richards added quietly, what happened today wasn't just corporate accountability. It was personal for me. When Elise described similar experiences at her airline, I realized the problem was industry-wide. But change has to start somewhere. Why not with Elite? For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt the weight fully lifting from his shoulders. The confrontation had been necessary, painful, but cleansing, like lancing an infected wound. Now the real healing could begin, not just for him personally, but for the company culture that had allowed discrimination to flourish unchecked for too long. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Institutional change never was. But with Richard's support and his new position's authority, Marcus finally had the opportunity to transform Elite Airways into the meritocracy it had always claimed to be, where pilots were judged solely by their skill, dedication, and performance, never by the color of their skin. 6 months after the confrontation that had transformed Elite Airways, Captain Marcus Washington stood in the cockpit of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, completing his pre-flight checks with practiced precision. Through the windshield, Chicago O'Hare's vast expanse stretched before him, morning sunlight glinting off other aircraft taxiing toward their gates. This wasn't just any flight. It was Marcus's ceremonial return to the captain's seat. Flight 1000, specially numbered to commemorate both his reinstatement and Elite's renewed commitment to equity. First Officer Lakshmi Patel, the Indian-American pilot who had provided crucial testimony about Miller's discriminatory behavior, worked efficiently beside him. Systems check complete, Captain, she reported with a smile. Everything's perfect. Thank you, First Officer Patel, Marcus replied. How does it feel to be on the first all-minority command crew flight that Elite has officially recognized? Overdue, Patel answered candidly, but satisfying nonetheless. The cockpit door opened, and Thomas Richards himself stepped in, a rare appearance by the owner on an actual flight. "Captain Washington, First Officer Patel. Just wanted to wish you both good flight before I take my seat." "Thank you for being here, sir," Marcus said. "It means a lot to the crew." Richards nodded. "This flight represents the elite airways. I always intended to build where excellence is the only standard that matters." He extended his hand to Marcus. "You've accomplished remarkable changes in just 6 months, Captain." Indeed, the transformation had been swift and comprehensive. With Richards' full backing, Marcus had implemented a complete overhaul of Elite's evaluation and promotion systems. Anonymous reviews of pilot performance, with identifying information redacted, had eliminated unconscious bias from advancement decisions. Disciplinary procedures now required objective evidence review before any action could be taken. Complaint statistics were monitored for patterns that might indicate targeted harassment. Most significantly, Elite had established the Aviation Equity Initiative, a program providing mentorship, scholarships, and career pathways for underrepresented groups in aviation. The initiative had already garnered industry attention, with 3 other major airlines adopting similar programs. After Richards departed, Marcus completed his final checks and prepared for passenger boarding. Through the open cockpit door, he could see the gathering crowd, not just typical travelers but journalists, airline executives, and even several young aspiring pilots from his new mentorship program. The lead flight attendant, Tyler Jenkins, the whistleblower who had testified about Miller's biased comments, appeared in the doorway. "Captain, we're ready to begin boarding, and there's something you should see first." Jenkins handed Marcus his tablet, displaying a live news feed. The headline made his breath catch: "Veronica Miller pleads guilty to workplace harassment charges." The article detailed how Miller, after her termination, had faced legal consequences for her systematic targeting of minority crew members. Rather than maintaining her innocence, she had eventually accepted a plea deal requiring community service, bias education, and a public acknowledgement of her discriminatory behavior. "Justice comes in many forms," Jenkins observed quietly. Marcus nodded, handing back the tablet. "Begin boarding, please." As passengers filed onto the aircraft, many paused to shake Marcus's hand or offer congratulations. His story had become widely known after Richards had made a public statement about Elite's commitment to addressing discrimination. Among the first passengers was a group of teenagers wearing Future Pilots of America t-shirts, participants in the mentorship program Marcus had established. They beamed with excitement as they greeted him, seeing in his position a future they could aspire to. When boarding completed, Marcus made his welcome announcement. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Marcus Washington. On behalf of Elite Airways and our entire crew, welcome aboard Flight 1000 from Chicago to San Francisco. Today's flight is special. It represents not just a journey across the country, but a journey toward a more equitable future in aviation. I'm honored to be your captain today, and I promise you both a safe and comfortable flight." As they taxied toward the runway, Marcus caught sight of his family watching from the observation deck, Aisha, Jada, and Michael, who had flown home from college specially for this occasion. They had weathered the storm together, and now they shared in the triumph. "Elite 1000, you're cleared for takeoff," Air Traffic Control announced. "Roger that. Elite 1000 cleared for takeoff," Marcus confirmed, advancing the throttles smoothly. The powerful Dreamliner accelerated down the runway, lifting gracefully into the clear blue sky. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. His 20-year career had been nearly destroyed by discrimination. His family had faced financial uncertainty and emotional stress. He had confronted the ugly reality that excellence alone couldn't overcome systemic bias without accountability and courage. Yet from that injustice had come transformation, not just for him personally, but for countless pilots who would follow. The changes at Elite Airways were already influencing industry standards. Other airlines were examining their own practices, recognizing that diversity wasn't just a moral imperative, but a competitive advantage. Later that evening, After a perfect flight and landing in San Francisco, Marcus attended a celebration hosted by Richards at the airline's West Coast headquarters. Pilots, flight attendants, and aviation professionals from across the industry gathered to mark the occasion. During the event, Richards called for attention and raised his glass. 6 months ago, Elite Airways faced a crucial decision, whether to defend discriminatory practices or embrace authentic change. Thanks to Captain Washington's courage and the support of many others who stood for justice, we chose the latter path. He gestured toward Marcus. The results speak for themselves. Pilot satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. Our applicant pool has increased by 40%, with significant growth in diversity. Most importantly, our safety metrics, already excellent, have improved even further, proving definitively that diversity strengthens rather than weakens our operations. The crowd applauded warmly. Richards continued, "But our work isn't finished. The Aviation Equity Initiative is just beginning. Captain Washington has developed a 10-year plan to ensure that our cockpits reflect the diversity of the communities we serve, not through lowered standards, but through expanded opportunity and elimination of artificial barriers." After the formal speeches, Marcus found himself surrounded by young pilots seeking advice and mentorship. Among them was a black female first officer from another airline. "Your case has had ripple effects throughout the industry," she told him. "At my company, they've already implemented new evaluation protocols similar to Elite's. 3 pilots who were passed over for promotion are being reconsidered." Similar stories emerged throughout the evening, systematic changes triggered by Elite's public commitment to equity. What had begun as one captain's fight for justice had catalyzed industry-wide examination of practices long accepted as normal. As the celebration wound down, Marcus stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking San Francisco Bay. Aisha joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Proud of you," she said simply. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. "Without any of you." "You know what Jada told me today?" Aisha said. "She's changing her major, still pre-law, but now focusing specifically on employment discrimination law." She said, watching. "Your case unfold showed her where she could make the greatest difference." Marcus felt a surge of emotion. Throughout his career, he had hoped his achievements might inspire others, particularly his children, to dream beyond the limitations society tried to impose. Now that hope was becoming reality in ways he couldn't have imagined. The next morning, before returning to Chicago, Marcus visited Elite's San Francisco Pilot Training Center, where the first cohort of Aviation Equity Initiative scholars was completing simulator training. 20 young people from underrepresented groups, each with demonstrated aptitude and passion for aviation, were receiving full scholarships for pilot training. As Marcus observed their session, one young man, a talented Latino student named Carlos, executed a particularly challenging emergency procedure flawlessly. "Excellent work," Marcus commented afterward. "That was textbook perfect." "Thank you, sir," Carlos replied, his expression serious. "I know I need to be twice as good." Marcus shook his head. "No, you need to be as good as your abilities allow. No more, no less. That's what we're working to build. A world where the same standards apply to everyone, where excellence is recognized regardless of what you look like or where you come from." Carlos nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's why this program matters so much." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "Aviation should judge you by your skill in the cockpit, period. And we're getting closer to that reality every day." Later, that week back in Chicago, Marcus received a call from Thomas Richards. "Captain Washington, I've just come from a meeting with the Airline Industry Association. They've unanimously adopted the core principles of our equity initiative as industry best practices. 6 major carriers have committed to implementing similar programs within the year." "That's tremendous news," Marcus responded. "It's your legacy," Richards countered. "When you faced discrimination, you could have settled for personal vindication. Instead, you pushed for systemic change that will benefit generations of pilots to come." After ending the call, Marcus walked to his home office, where he'd framed his original captain's wings alongside the ceremonial ones Richards had presented during his reinstatement. Beside them hung a simple plaque bearing Captain Reynolds' Attendant. "Tata Tagen Banon." advice that had guided his career. Be twice as good, work twice as hard, complain half as much. Below it, Marcus had added his own corollary. And when the time comes, speak truth to power, so the next generation won't need to be twice as good. That evening, he received a video call from Michael at Embry-Riddle. His son's expression was jubilant. "Dad, my professor used Elite's Aviation Equity Initiative as our case study today. Your picture was in the presentation." Marcus smiled. How did the class respond? They were totally engaged. A lot of questions about how the changes were implemented so quickly. The professor said it's a textbook example of how institutional culture can be transformed when leadership truly commits to change. After talking with Michael, Marcus joined Aisha and Jada in their living room. A news program was discussing the broader impact of the changes at Elite Airways, how they had sparked examination of hiring and promotion practices across multiple industries. "You've started something important," Aisha observed, squeezing his hand. "We've started something important," Marcus corrected. "This was never just about me." As he looked around at his family, at the home and future he had nearly lost to discrimination, Marcus felt profound gratitude. The system had failed him, but through persistence, courage, and the support of allies at every level, that system was now being remade. Captain Marcus Washington had spent 20 years proving himself in the cockpit. Now, he was helping build a world where the next generation of pilots would be judged solely by that same standard. Their skill, their judgment, their dedication to safety, regardless of the color of their skin. And that was the greatest justice of all. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up against discrimination and create positive change? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If this story of courage and justice inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more powerful stories of people overcoming injustice. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear this message of hope and transformation. Thank you for joining Captain Washington on his journey from discrimination to vindication. Remember that one person's courage can truly change an entire system when they refuse to accept injustice. This powerful story teaches us that systemic racism often hides behind standard procedures and legitimate concerns. When people in power selectively apply rules based on race, they maintain discrimination while claiming objectivity. True, justice requires examining patterns, not isolated incidents. Captain Washington's journey shows that excellence alone cannot overcome prejudice. Even with a perfect 20-year record, he faced immediate suspension based on false accusations. The system protected itself until confronted with irrefutable evidence and leadership willing to take responsibility. The most important lesson is that meaningful change requires action at all levels. It took courage from Washington to fight back, integrity from whistleblowers to speak truth, legal expertise to build the case, and ultimately, authority from Richards to implement reform. No single person could have transformed Elite Airways alone. This story also demonstrates how discrimination damages both individuals and institutions. Elite nearly lost an exceptional captain while maintaining systems that undermined its own excellence. When organizations truly commit to equity, judging people solely on merit, everyone benefits from the highest standards applied fairly. Finally, Captain Washington teaches us that justice isn't just personal vindication, but creating lasting change that helps others. His greatest victory wasn't regaining his position, but establishing systems ensuring future pilots would face equal treatment, regardless of race.